you? Hope things are going well over there. How's life?
Oh, it's okay. It feels the last 6 weeks feels like one long day with naps, if you know what I mean. It's just haven't gone anywhere, and
It does
uh,
seem awfully foggy, doesn't it? Gosh, it's crazy like
yeah,
this.
yeah,
Yeah,
we'll remember it, and it'll be interesting to see how we all look back on it.
absolutely. Well, welcome to everyone who's tuning in today, and we're just going to speak about the clarinet and music and careers and all that kind of good stuff. And in fact, you're wearing an interlocking sweatshirt, I noticed, which is pretty awesome. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, there we
Interlocking
go.
alumni. There we go. I
I
wanted to
thought
ask you
that's one
actually.
of the many things that you and I have in common.
That's right. Absolutely right. In fact, just recently I saw, I don't know where, I think it came from Fan Lei in China, in Beijing, that sent me a picture of your senior high school picture from Interlochen Arts Academy. And
Wow.
had these really big, thick black glasses on.
Yeah.
And it made me think about, just asking you, you know, what was it like, for you growing up and the kinds of things that you had to prepare yourself for the career that you wanted, the person that you wanted to be and the career that you wanted?
What Interlaken was like
Yeah,
at
what
that time?
Interlaken was like, and just growing up, the things that you went through as a high school student and a college student, and the things that you were looking for in your career, and how that either changed or panned out the way you wanted it to.
Well, I have to say that Interlaken was was a seminal experience in my life. I grew up in Queens, outer borough of New York, and there were a lot of opportunities there, but you really had to work for them. I had to walk a few blocks to a bus that went to a subway, then and go in rush hour for about 40 minutes into Manhattan, and then walk to my first high school, which was the School of Performing Arts. And when I went to the Interlochen Arts Academy, you'd roll out of bed, and go to the mandatory breakfast in the cafeteria, and then go practice or go to your class or go to your and that was fantastic for me, for a kid from New York. I felt like I could really focus, and so at age 15, I more or less decided at Interlochen that I was going to do music and the clarinet for my career. And there were so many opportunities, and I think that the mentorship of Fred Ormond at that time really helped me channel the direction that I needed to go. He was the teacher at the Interlochen Arts Academy from the second year of the academy, I think, and I came there around the fourth year of the academy in the 1960s.
Hmm.
And then, was he still there when you went to Interlochen? Was he your teacher, Richard?
Actually, Fred was there in the summers. He was already at University of Michigan when I was
Oh,
a
I see.
student at
I get the
HBCU. So
chronology mixed up.
no, that's okay. In fact, I had just missed you at Michigan because you were there for a number of years
Oh, right.
before I
When I
moved
was
there.
teaching
Yeah.
at Michigan, right. And Fred came
Hmm.
after me. Yeah, it's funny how
That's
we
right.
need a time machine to kind of
I
keep track of
know.
all these things.
It is pretty amazing, and we all have such connections with Interlochen. Of course, still is a wonderful place for a lot of people, and I certainly had amazing students there that have done amazing things over the years, and it's a really special place, and I know it is for a lot of people. In talking about sort of your career, and Fred and others that you've had amazing mentors. Is there a particular piece of advice that someone's given you in your career that has stuck with you all these years?
Well, besides practice,
Yeah, besides practice.
uh, really, it's I guess so many wonderful pieces of advice from so many teachers, but that's a really tough question. I think probably, interestingly enough, some of the best advice um, came from a colleague, a fellow student at Interlochen in the summer camp, who was an amazing prodigy. named Lauren Levy, who then became principal clarinet in LA Phil. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But he had a lot of really strong opinions, and I just remember him saying one time that he thought, if you have a beautiful sound, then people will want to listen to you. And I thought he had a really good sound, but his strong point was that he could play anything at any speed. And it was just astounding. He was the first person I heard play Nielsen's Clarinet Concerto with the Interlaken Orchestra in the summer of 1963, when we were both 13 years old.
Wow.
And this is 13-year-old kid just rattling it off. And so he had my attention, and I listened to what he had to say in that regard. So I found him to be a great influence, both as an example of what a kid can do on a clarinet, right, and some of his thoughts and opinions. And we knew each other after that for years. I'm sorry that he's no longer with us. As far as
I've heard so many stories about him in LA Philharmonic and picking up some of the most contemporary music in that orchestra and just knocking it out. The guy was just incredible. Just
anything. Yeah. When I was in LA during the years that I played with LA Chamber Orchestra and taught at USC, I'd run into Lauren a lot. We'd play on some of the same studio dates for movies and things. But one of the things we did together was a recording of Schoenberg's Kammer Symphony number, Opus 9, that in the original version for about 15 instruments. And LA Chamber Orchestra only had two clarinetists. I was principal, and Gary Gray was second clarinet, but Gary played the B-flat clarinet. I wound up out on a limb playing the E-flat clarinet part, and we needed somebody to play bass, and we got Lauren Levy, who was then the bass clarinet player in the LA Phil before he was principal. And he made it sound so easy. But those of us who played it know it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, other advice, words of wisdom, doing it every day, and not trying to set world records, but trying to do what you're doing better is what I learned from Fred Ormond. What I took away from Anthony Gigliotti was discipline, the etudes and the scales. I'd come to lessons and I say, I brought the Nielsen Concerto to play for you. He says, let me hear your scales, all of them, and you had to earn the right to play the other stuff.
Oh, that's great.
And Robert Marcellus was the guru for how to produce a sound and articulate on the clarinet, and had an uncanny ability to pinpoint how you need to do it, how you had to shape your inner voicing of your mouth, and how far apart your jaws should be, and how you shape the stream and how you breathe. And he could sound like a god on any instrument. He'd say, here, let me see your instrument. And, don't ever complain about your reed, because he would make it sound like the best one you ever had.
That's amazing. Well, I remember at one point that Fred, when I was studying with Fred, he would, ask me to bring in 10 reeds to a lesson, and then he would go through them and play them himself and pick the worst one and make me play the lesson on the worst one. And then the next week my reeds got a lot better, my reeds got a lot better. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, you're only as strong as your weakest link, huh?
That's right. Well, speaking of
those were the days, right, when we had those cane reeds that you had to adjust.
Right. Those were the days, not too long ago, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I had to walk 7 miles to school in my bare feet and play on cane reeds.
Well, speaking of sort of reevaluating ourselves all the time and what we do, and teaching the techniques of the instrument and characteristics of of all the things that one needs to do in both orchestra and chamber music and solo works and things that you've done pretty much all your career, is there, some advice that you have for prospective students, for you and for others, just in the things that they're, what you be looking for, and the things that maybe have even changed over the years for yourself? Maybe there's things now that you look for a little differently than you used to.
Well, what it's all about, right, for any instrument is making music. So you can be the most as athletic um, gymnastic clarinetist, and that's really interesting to hear for a while. But I'm always listening and trying to play the instrument in such a way that it communicates something, hopefully what the composer intended, and maybe even then some. The greatest moment is playing a piece for a composer that they've written. Uh, has to be a living composer, and
Mm-hmm.
having them say that it exceeded what their hope was, to express, or at least that it is what they had in mind, and keep doing what you're doing. And we can only imagine or guess and research what the composers of the past would have wanted. And in the case of composers who wrote for individuals who lived into the era of recording, we can listen to early recordings. But I think often the abilities, the virtuosity of players, from generation to generation, um, improve the ability, at least, to realize some of the most severe technical demands that composers have put on players. But it really is great to go back and listen to some of the early recordings, not necessarily clarinetists, but singers from 100 years ago, and violinists like Chrysler and Heifetz, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, kind of get a sense of the way music was played. I find that some of that is lost a bit now, when the bar is set so high technically on every instrument. There, um, one student after another comes in and does things that I could never dream of doing on the instrument back in the day, and at the same time, uh, I'm wondering what it is they're saying sometimes.
Mm-hmm. 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 Do you find, in that particular topic of prospective students, that other than sort of the technique, are there things about the instrument themselves that itself that feels different, or all the fundamentals that we have worked on all these years, and fundamentals of pitch and rhythm and things like this that have always been so important to us orchestrally, and of course chamber music, which I think is one of our highest levels of musicianship and creativity, and you, of course, is so well known as being one of the great chamber musicians of all time, honestly. And are there some sort of awareness that you think that more students or professionals need to have in chamber music, and things that they're working on with other players? I mean, do you find that that's something that's lost, or is it getting even better now than it used to be?
Well, it depends on where you are,
Mm-hmm.
where you study, where you play, and what your focus is. One of the reasons I love teaching at Yale is the very focused curriculum of chamber music.
Mm.
Everybody in the School of Music plays in at least one group several hours a week, and has a coaching every week, in addition to their instrumental lesson and their studio class or seminar. And for me, one of the great things about being a student at first at Interlochen and then at Curtis was that chamber music was a big part of what we did. Being at Interlochen and living there with all the other students made it really easy to access your fellow students and take the initiative to play chamber music. And there were always opportunities to perform. So didn't have to take the subway for an hour and a half to meet your violinist friend in Brooklyn. If you lived in Queens or Manhattan, you just walk across the street and you'd have some free time and, hey, let's read through the Mozart trio, or you get your friends to get together and play in a woodwind quintet. And that was always encouraged by the faculty, so that the access was great and the opportunities to go with it. And then after Interlochen, I was a student at Curtis, and the first year chamber music. What?
Connection a little bit, David. Are you still?
Oh, do I want to? It says, do I want to back up with Time Machine? No. Is it better now?
There we go. You're back.
I think there was an external disk that was messing with our connection. It was asking me if I wanted to back up. Uh-oh. You're frozen now.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Are we good?
Yes, great. Sorry about that.
Love this technology. I do. Now you're frozen again. I'm not frozen. I'm just sitting still. How about you? Now you're gone. Okay. Don't know what to do. I think I'm going to...
Hi, David.
Joel, hi.
I know Richard will be back on in a minute.
I'm going to unplug my external drive, which seems to have interrupted. Or maybe that was his.
No idea. But I know that this is really popular. There are a lot of people watching.
Oh, and they're all saying piano now. Wait. There we go.
So actually, while we're waiting for Richard to come in, there was a question that came in. What was it like for you performing with Paul Shun Feld?
Oh, great. Paul, it was so many years ago, but Paul, consummate musician, really great character, wonderful composer. I worked with him at first as a pianist, and then started to hear his compositions. And actually, I think I was the one who commissioned him to write that trio, the shtetl pieces, the clarinet, violin, piano trio, and we premiered it in the 1980s in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, I think it was in the 80s. And but we also did lots of chamber music together. I remember we recorded, probably not in the catalog anymore, but we recorded Bartok contrasts with violinist Sergio Luca back around 1980. And I heard him play so much chamber music. He was an incredible virtuoso pianist. Everybody knows him as a composer now. And he writes really difficult music for the piano, but he has total credibility because he could play anything that he wrote. And that's not always the case with composers.
For the people watching, you've commissioned so many pieces. What is some advice that you have for artists that want to commission pieces or work with new composers? Obviously, I know being involved with you in Chamber Music Northwest through Backun, I've seen how much your impact on the clarinet literature has been, but also just in chamber music in general.
Well, it starts early when you're in school and you're a student and the composers are students. Yale is a particularly fertile place for these collaborations because one of the major focuses is on composition. Has a renowned composition department, and so the students go on to win Pulitzer Prizes and have works commissioned by major orchestras. But some of the connections that are made when they're all students are really, really important. So I advise students to look around you and look at what other musicians are doing and listen to the music of the composition students and think about having them write something for you. I know that composition students at Yale are kind of blessed in a reciprocal way, because there's a series of concerts that they call New Music New Haven, where the Yale instrumental students play the new compositions of the composer students, and it's a very symbiotic relationship in that way. But your question about commissioning music, I think it's important to identify composers that really say something to you and that you feel like you could bring something to in performance, and challenge you as well. But there are many composers that I admire, but it may not feel like they're the right fit for me to perform, that others might be able to do it better. And I try to be aware of that. But I've been in a position of commissioning many composers to write chamber music that's not necessarily for the clarinet as well. I always have had that conversation with composers that I was commissioning for either Lincoln Center or Chamber Music Northwest in Portland, where they say, well, of course, there'll be a clarinet in the piece. What else would you like? And I say, no. Only if that's what you have in mind to write. And then we go back and forth. Just because I'm wearing the hat of the commissioner doesn't mean you have to write for me. But a lot of great chamber music has been written with a part for me, and for that I'm very grateful.
Do you see
one more piece of advice for artists is always try to form consortia, groups of musicians and organizations that will co-commission a work for many reasons. The most obvious is to be able to share the expense of paying the composer, but it's also a great benefit to the composer, because the composer is then motivated to write the piece for the consortium because they know they'll have multiple performances. So I think that's a very important thing for people to remember who are interested in expanding the repertoire.
In the foreseeable future, where do you see new clarinet repertoire? Do you see it taking over a larger percentage of young artists and performing artists' repertoire on stage? And I take this question from the Backun competition that we held at Vanderbilt a few years ago, and you and Richard were adamant that that with the repertoire that we include artists that are current, that are living today, and new music. And that's quite different from a lot of other competitions which have the same standard repertoire. But where do you see this playing out in the future in terms of the exposure for the public, but also the exposure for young artists and everyone else to be playing current repertoire?
Well, I'm a big fan of the standard repertoire. There's a reason that it's the standard repertoire. And I'm also one who enjoys discovering hidden treasures from the past. That being said, I think our mission is to honor the canon, but also to expand it. So, you know, I don't feel like I'm a specialist. There are some things that I feel I do better than others, but I try to do as many different types of things as possible and stay open to all kinds of new things. It was a revelation for me, 10 or 15 years ago when I first started seriously playing tango music, and commissioned a whole suite of tango music that I was really fortunate enough to play with a great violinist, Cho Yang Lin, and a bunch of Argentinians, and written by a distant cousin of mine from Argentina, who is a great composer, Lalo Shifrin, and he wrote a whole tango suite for us. And this was a whole new world for me to discover. And all of the compositions that I have been involved in commissioning, that many of which at first looked like I was going to have to bow out because they seemed impossible, were really helpful in opening new vistas for me and challenging me to improve my ability as an instrumentalist. And then over the years, the big test is what stays in the repertoire. And there are a number of pieces I've been involved in commissioning that have become fairly standard repertoire for clarinetists, and others that I thought should have and didn't. And but it's still early. I'd like to come back. I'd like to be able to come back in 100 years and see what, if anybody's playing the clarinet and what they're doing.
All right, I'm going to bow out. Let you two continue on.
Hi, Richard. Welcome back.
I'm back. I have no idea what happened. Everything just went totally blank all of a sudden.
You didn't have a power failure or something?
No, I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. Well, I have a couple more questions for you, just if you don't mind. You have been a mentor of mine all these years, and it's such an honor for me to ask you all these questions about sort of your thinking in the clarinet and the things that are of priority to you. I guess I would ask you, is there any particular technique that you have discovered in your own playing over the years that you were not taught and or no one else teaches? Because that's always something that is very interesting to find out from a lot of different people. Like if there's little things that we discover in our own playing that we weren't taught, it just sort of happens. It morphs into something that becomes quite an important part of our playing.
I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours.
I will. Absolutely.
Okay, well, for me, I'm sure it's something that I was taught, but maybe I just didn't process it properly, because as I look back, what I'm going to talk about is something that I'm sure that I heard from Herbert Blayman and Fred Orman and Anthony Gigliotti and Robert Marcellus and Mitchell Leery, who all described it in different ways. Mm. And I somehow had to process it and then kind of have an aha moment halfway through my professional career, which has to do with breathing and support and the whole notion of what is diaphragm support and tone production, and for me it was kind of a visualization to try to imagine the airstream as something you can see, and to use the airstream the way a violinist uses a bow, and to kind of visualize what the air is doing, and to think both about the intake of air and maximizing that, and various techniques of being able to have a really full lung full of air, and then compress it, and then use it in a way that you can control, very much like the visualization of a violinist who uses a bow, and how it hits the string and how it sustains, and there's all kinds of tricks that one that comes to mind that Marcel Tabuteau used to teach his oboe students, which was to have a candle on a table and to blow on the flame and make it flicker, but don't blow it out, and to bend it at the same rate. And I do that with a piece of tissue paper or a dollar bill to try to illustrate to students that the airstream definitely has a life to it, and that you can visualize that and then convert it to what you hear, so that you're prepared to make phrases and not just blow into the instrument and make a sound and move your fingers. And I think it goes back to something that you asked earlier in the beginning of the question, you said, in addition to technique, and then went on to elaborate other aspects of playing. But I think that it is a technique. The production of the sound and how you use the wind and how you connect notes and how you voice intervals and integrate that. Those are all techniques that I think are every bit, if not more important than velocity and dexterity. So,
Great.
yeah, that answer your question?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. That's the kind of stuff that I think is really important in sort of the future of our clarinet, pedagogy, and the things that we really want to focus on students, and because there are things that they, like you said earlier, do so well now. I mean, I remember at Interlochen, in one of my first years teaching at the academy, and there was a student that came in, he was 14 and played the Francais concerto, and I was like, whoa, but yes, you're right. I mean, what's that?
When I was 14, the Francais concerto hadn't even been written.
So yeah, I mean, it's sort of amazing the kind of repertoire that folks are playing now. It's pretty remarkable and very exciting, I think. And I guess one of the things that I the answer to my question that you asked me a minute ago, as far as another technique for me that I think it's an art that no one talks about on the instrument. And I know that you do it because I've seen you do it, and I've seen a lot of great artists do this. And again, it's something that I think sort of morphs into something significant after many years, after those 10,000 hours of learning the instrument. And for me, it's a technique of shading and learning how to deal with intonation on the instrument, and being aware of your surroundings when you're playing with other people, and being able to adjust on the spot. And I go back to sort of a mentor of mine, and I know also Don Cinta was a mentor of yours. But Don was just incredible about intonation and bringing that as a focus into his students. And that's something that I know I picked up from him directly, because he just really practiced it every day, with the drone, and practicing scales to the drone, and learning the flexibility of the instrument. And for us, because we're not playing on an instrument that is shaped like a cone, it's a little different voicing, and the voicing of the saxophone, of course, is a little different from how we perceive it on the clarinet. But shading notes and learning how the techniques of shading things, like, for instance, if you're playing a low A, right? And we get into a low A, and we shade the instrument by doing things like this, right? We're doing things like this, or in the upper
like this.
Right, right. We're trying to avoid that, right? So, because otherwise the tone gets out. So we're doing little things to adjust for that, and that's a technique that I think is very valuable. And with the exception of a few notes on the instrument, that you're literally just having to close keys, and you can't do a whole lot of shading with things like a C, but you can. But you have to be very careful doing it, and there are things like that I think come into our playing now that one wants to talk about and teach with, because I think it's it's the next chapter in the things that we're doing on the instrument. And so that was my answer. But and going back to your thought of sort of secrets, the clarinet secrets. Are there any other little secrets that you think that you have that you would share with our?
If I told you, it wouldn't be a secret.
I know, but
now we have no secrets. But
no, we don't.
I think that the most important thing is to stay relevant and understand why you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you if you have something that you want to say or communicate or enjoy being in the music, then that's more important than anything.
Mm.
Finding ways to do that, and hopefully, the opportunities will find you if you are prepared in those ways. But also, you need to develop that in order to seek out the opportunities.
Yeah, it's
I
great.
got a thing across my screen that says Clarinet
Yes.
Podcast. Hello. Hello.
Hello back. Well, I have another interesting one for you.
How is that possible that people are saying hello on our screens?
I don't know. I think that's maybe Sean that came in there for a second. I'm not sure. Okay, so here's another one. This one's maybe a hard question to answer, but I thought it was a good one. Is there anything that you wish could be changed about the classical music world and the way that it works?
Wow. How much time do we have?
Plenty of time.
Really? Well,
like a frustration maybe that you experience commonly, and
well, you can't even answer that without getting into sociological issues and political issues, because basically it starts with education, and it's involved with government and support for music, and audience building is something that's so often discussed, but it starts with early education and how important music is to families and schools, and it extends through to government, and making decisions because things are worthwhile, not just because they're worth money. And sometimes, if things that are worthwhile are fostered for a long time, then they do make money. But I am always amazed that in the United States of America, the government spends the most money for music through the military, which is great, wonderful opportunities for so many musicians, and it's indispensable to have great bands play at state funerals and all kinds of events. But there are thousands and thousands of musicians who work for the government by way of playing in the military bands, and that's great. But I wish that the government would spend more money on classical music, and so there is the National Endowment for the Arts, and I'm glad that still exists. But music in the schools, which has a checkered history, I credit the public school system in New York City in the early 1960s, maybe even more than Interlochen, with my having the opportunity to be a musician, because it was a big part of the curriculum, and go to junior high school, and there was actually an instrument lending library in my public school in Queens, New York, not in a wealthy neighborhood. And I think around the country, some school districts still place a high premium on that, but it's disappeared in a lot of places. And so I think just having more support right from the ground up, and faith in the art form at all levels, not just in the marketplace. It's difficult because it is very strong, but it's also very fragile in so many ways. There's great music being made, and there are big audiences out there, but it would be nice to see more. And it's interesting to travel and play concerts for different cultures, and to go to Korea and Taiwan and mainland China, excuse me, and play concerts and see, thousands of young people come out and stay after for an hour and wanting to meet the musicians. And there are very few places in the U.S. where you see that. Some, but it's interesting that Western music has become so strong in Asia. But of course, in Europe too, there are many, many more concert halls and concert societies and orchestras and opera companies. So if I could change anything, it would be to have somehow magically make a realization about how important it is in our society from an early time in everyone's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna go get out my time machine and make it happen.
So in all of the experiences that you've had in your amazing career, is there any particular moments that have stayed in your mind as being some of the most wonderful, memorable experiences for you? Could be recordings too. It could be anything.
Yeah, there are a lot. Where the one that just always pops into my head was having the opportunity when I was still a student at Curtis to commute up to New York and play in the American Symphony with Leopold Stokowski, and getting that job was kind of a kid's dream. Play whatever it was, 16 concerts in Carnegie Hall and 16 concerts at Lincoln Center with Leopold Stokowski, who I had seen recently in the movie Fantasia and thought was pretty cool. So he was 89 at that time and still going strong most of the time. But the specific experience was having the opportunity. It wasn't just the 16 concerts in Carnegie Hall, but we had 4 rehearsals for each concert. So I got to go to Carnegie Hall as early as I could when they opened the stage for musicians to warm up, when no one else was there yet, and just practice on the stage of Carnegie Hall. And for me, that was an awesome thing for a kid who grew up in New York. And it was all the jokes about practicing to get to Carnegie Hall. I got to practice in Carnegie Hall.
That's
and
awesome.
One day before rehearsal, I was warming up and practicing something that was going to be rehearsed that day. And I just felt this presence to my right in the chair that had been empty, and almost jumped out of my chair. And it was Stokowski. It was just sitting there listening to me practice. And it was a little bit freaky.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that's amazing.
Don't stop,
That's awesome.
So that's great. Out in my mind. It was kind of a bridge to the past to have had that experience.
That's incredible.
There have been tons of other really cool experiences. Some interesting, maybe not as inspiring. There was a day that Tony Gigliotti, who was my teacher at Curtis, called me and sounded just awful. And he said, "What are you doing right now?" And I said, I have class or something. He said, "Well, can you get out of it? Get down to the Academy of Music and get on the bus, because I'm sick. And there's a concert in Atlantic City tonight. We need somebody." Anyway, so I had to go run and sub with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And it was the first time I had played with them or done anything like that. And the concert was that night. And I thought, at least there's a rehearsal. And it was an all Gershwin concert with the Concerto in F and American in Paris. And I was going to play second clarinet. And they reshuffled the section. And Don Montanaro played principal. and the guest conductor was Arthur Fiedler. So I got on the bus, didn't quite know what to say to the other musicians on the bus who were about 30, 40 years older than me. And we get to Atlantic City. We go into this old barn called Constitution Hall, where they used to hold the Miss America pageants. That's where the concert was supposed to be, and it was in the winter. And we go in, and it was probably about 60 degrees in the hall. They hadn't turned the heat on early enough to get this giant place up to a room temperature. And so, the union steward got out the rule book and said, "Oh, we can't play unless it's at least 70 degrees or 68 degrees." So the rehearsal was canceled. So I had to play that night without a rehearsal in music that I really didn't know. And Gershwin is not such easy stuff. And it was a harrowing experience, but somehow I pulled through. And the guys, Don Montanaro and Raul Querzi and Ron Rubin, where the rest of the section were very nice to the kid. So I remember that very fondly.
That's an awesome story. Well, I was in the ballet orchestra in Philadelphia for about 6 seasons, and so I got to know a lot of those guys really well. And
Yeah.
hello to Ron, and if he's watching today, one of the funniest men I've ever met in my life.
Great musician.
Absolutely. So we have actually some questions from the public that I'd like to ask you. One of the first ones I think would be great to ask you is one of your great, most famous recordings of the Brahms sonatas with Kara Rosenberger. And I would think that was late 80s, maybe something like that, maybe.
Mid 80s.
The question is, how have your concepts of clarinet sound and or performance changed since then? This is from Jeff Nudell.
That's a good question. I'm going to have to go back and listen to those recordings, and then I can tell you. I've listened to a few of my old recordings, in the last few years, and my reactions really vary. Sometimes it's like, "Oh, why did I do that?" Or
right.
It ranges from that to, "Oh, I wonder if I can still do that." and probably more than anything, even with recent recordings, more recent recordings, when I hear them, I say, "I wish I'd done more. I wish I said more and made that point that I can clearly hear, but I wish I'd made it even more convincingly." And I listened to a few pieces that I've recorded multiple times, like the Brahms Clarinet Quintet. I have about 4 recordings of that, and I feel like it's not a major difference, but I like to see the trajectory that I'm trying to bring it more to life each time.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the Mozart Concerto, I only have 1 commercial recording and about 50 live concert recordings that I kind of hear what I feel, and that is that what I'm looking for is to bring out the operatic qualities, the vocal qualities of these pieces beyond the clarinetness of them.
Right. Wonderful. So if this is always a question I've always want to ask you, actually, what is in your career the most performed piece?
Oh, KV 622.
Okay.
Well, maybe it might be a tie with the quintet.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 Mozart pieces. Because I've toured them both, and when you go on tour and you play every night for a couple of weeks, the numbers add up.
And what's it like doing that every night for a couple of weeks?
It's heaven. Aside from the checking out of the hotel and getting to the airport and being exhausted all the time, the rest of it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So let's see, going through the public chat here. Let's see if there's another one that you would like to. Lots of friends and former students all saying hello. Ben Lulich and lots of folks in there. So great to see all of you checking this out. And we are hoping to continue this next week with Anthony McGill on Wednesday at 4:00.
Fantastic. Tune in.
Which will be great, and a few more people down the road. And
you should all realize.
What's that?
I say,
no.
Anthony McGill, right? Wasn't he a former student of yours?
He was. Yes, he was. A long time ago, in a different lifetime.
In his career. Can I interrupt just to thank you for doing this? It's wonderful. We need terrific things like this that enlighten us during these dark times. So thank you, Richard.
Oh, well, it's really a pleasure. I mean, it's sort of really we thought about it last week and said, hey, let's just do this because it'll be a lot of fun, and I've been calling a lot of folks and hopefully get a lot of people here to say all the things they love about the clarinet and music, and I think it's a wonderful thing to, and thank you for being a part of this. It's amazing. Let's see. So Omar asks, how was Mitchell Leery as a teacher?
He was wonderful. He basically talked about the music, and I worked with him for one summer at the Music Academy of the West in Santa Barbara, and he was so gracious and enthusiastic about all the things that we worked on, and he really was out of the same school as I was already a student at Curtis, and he had also studied with Daniel Bernard and had been a student at Curtis, like my teacher, Giuliatti, and so many others, like Robert Marcellus, who had all studied with Daniel Bernard at one time. So the pedagogy was similar. And we became very good friends. And then quite a few years later, we wound up sharing the clarinet class at USC. And both Mitchell Lurie and John Moeller, with whom I shared the clarinet class at Michigan, were the best colleagues that anyone could ever imagine working with.
John was an amazing clarinetist as well. He was, of course, the other teacher with Fred at Michigan for many years, and one of the outstanding human beings I think I've ever met. Just an amazing person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Mitchell, of course, I knew from years ago from the Mouthpiece stuff, which my other part of my life, right? And certainly met him many times.
Mouthpiece somewhere. It's very nice.
I'm glad to hear that. That's actually one of my goals, everyone, is to not talk about any of that. Just because I think it's important to hear, all the other stuff that we really like to teach and talk about, and sort of more of the intellectual side of what we do. And I think it's really an amazing experience to have this conversation with you, David. One of the other memorable things that going back to talking about recordings, one of my favorites, which I was many years ago, and I'd asked you about, what did you think about this? And you were not particularly happy with the tempo of the Bartok contrast in this one recording that also has the Messiaen End of Time quartet.
Really?
Yeah.
My own recording?
Yeah. And I remember saying, like, oh, it's like one of my favorite recordings from you. And you said, the tempo's a little too slow. I didn't really like it at the time.
It's the Antimed from the Messiaen.
Oh, it's the beginning of the Messiaen. Okay. It was the first movement, maybe.
Not so much the first, but the the fourth movement, yap-bum, ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-bum, we would yap-bum, ba-ba. It was almost like a Freylock instead of.
So it was the Messiaen. Okay, all right, great. See, these are things important to us to come back and revisit, because it's probably been 25 years since I asked you that question.
I think so. I mean, that seems like what I would have referred to if I had said that.
I think so. I think that's correct. I think that's correct. So what are your favorite recordings that you like to listen to?
Boy, it's really varied these days. My 14-year-old son had me listening to an entire album of Smashing Pumpkins the other day. It broadened my horizons. And I've been listening to a fair amount of jazz. But I listen to a lot of the music that I've been involved with programming. So lots and lots of chamber music, Beethoven string quartets, Mozart viola quintets, all kinds of piano trios and quartets. And I listen to music of composers whose music I'm interested in playing, but whose work I'm not familiar with. And I listen to a lot of recordings of young clarinetists who are applying to Yale and send these video recordings. And I'm not kidding. I learned so much from hearing all the talent out there, and through teaching, I become aware of so much great repertoire that I didn't know about. It's a way of cross-pollination that students, being a graduate school at Yale, students have come from you at Oberlin, and from Juilliard, and from Eastman, and from Northwestern, and so many other schools. And it's really interesting to see what repertoire they're working on and what the different teachers are delving into. And it's so interesting. I hate to use this term, but repertoire becomes viral. You hear it one place, and then it crops up somewhere else, and then it's everywhere.
It's like the Wiedemann, right?
Oh, it's half of the people who auditioned for Yale this year played George's Fantasy. Yeah. And for a while, it was the Defaya homage from Bela Kovacs.
The Kovacs, right?
Once, and then somebody else played it, and then everybody. And that's really interesting. And I like to think that can happen with music, some of the music that we commission or that we champion.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to actually sort of readjusting audition music in the next year, just because I think it would be nice to include some diversity and different composers, modern composers, and things that I think are relevant today. And it would be nice to step away from. It's a great piece, but it would be nice to step away from the Stravinsky three pieces a little bit when it comes to college auditions.
You trying to tell me something?
No, I do the same thing. It's on mine too, and I apologize to everyone.
I've used every year's auditions, the second Stravinsky piece. For 30 years, I've been asking for that because I can tell so much from just that 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it shows you so many things so quickly, and it is a wonderful piece. But yeah, definitely. In fact, I rediscovered
when we sat next to each other in a competition jury.
Yes.
You were tearing your hair out. I don't want to hear that Stravinsky yet.
Well, if you remember, we did the judging of, I think it was in Beijing, the 75 Mozart clarinet concertos in 3 days. If you remember that experience, that was pretty intense.
Piece, but I sometimes get annoyed with how it's played.
Yeah, I mean, it would be impossible to do what we do if we didn't like that piece, because it's in every lesson, it's in every audition, it's and thankfully it is a fantastic piece, and that we all get to experience it a lot. Yeah.
Of course, that was billed as the Mozart competition too, right?
That's right. It was. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know we're out of time, and there's so many people who've asked questions, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of them. There is one particular one that I think would be interesting just to answer, get an answer from you. And that is, do you have any, this is from Orlando, do you have any advice for any young performers who want to start getting out into the music world, and anything in particular that you think is an important part of today's new musicians and younger players that want to get out there and get into the business?
May I ask how young? That's a relative term. See, I think you're a younger musician, Richard.
How about I just turned 51, so it's not too bad. It's not
That's
too
such a nice age. So,
bad.
but really, the person who asked the question, what is the age?
I don't know, but I'm assuming it's probably college level, college age.
Well, practice, find opportunities to perform, always be prepared for what you do in public, and try to play as much music well as you possibly can with as many other musicians in as many circumstances, and always prepare for it. And then opportunities will find you because you're doing what's necessary to find the opportunities.
Great answer. Well, with that, I want to say thank you so much, Mr. David Shifrin.
Thank you.
And what a pleasure to see you. And I hope that we all get to see each other very soon in real life. And
Yeah,
we wish everyone to be, that's right. We wish everyone to be safe and healthy. And thank you so much for tuning in, and tune in again next week, same time, and with Anthony McGill from the New York Philharmonic.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.